Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Judge, shukran. Thank you. Good evening. Thank you for this kind invitation. Abuna, Father, Dr. Atalia, Danielle, and everyone at Notre Dame community, thank you for having me. And in the age of everything related to Palestine being cancelled, I don't take this platform for granted. And I'm very grateful for this to happen. It's going to be challenging to summarize the main points in my book in 40 minutes, but I'm going to try to do so. And I would like to begin by quoting Palestinian theologian Yusuf al-Khoury, who comes from Gaza. Genocide against the Palestinian people did not start in 2023, but rather has been ongoing for more than 100 years. Genocide is an ideology that began in the minds of proto-Zionist Christians, Zionists, and Orientalists who claimed that Palestine was a land without people. To talk about faith, the Bible, and the genocide is emotionally taxing. It is not only that I am addressing existential issues for us as Palestinians, but it's also about my faith, actually having to defend my faith and my being. So I hope you realize from the beginning, whether you read the book or listen to this talk, this is not an academic exercise or an abstract study. This is why when I speak, or when we speak as Palestinians, usually we speak with so much emotion, usually anger and frustration and pain. Because we are tired. We are tired of calling for the world to humanize our children. We are tired and weary from the images of children pulled from under the rubble, and tragically this resumed just last week. We're tired of images of bloody hospitals, of bereaved families. And in fact, I have left the West Bank, not Gaza, the West Bank, with close to 40,000 people already displaced in a systematic attempt to ethnically cleanse the refugee camps in the West Bank. So currently the seeds for more ethnic cleansing are already happening, again being planted in the West Bank. And before I begin, I need to clarify something. Genocide is not a term I use lightly, and I think it's important that I say this. I was recently asked in a talk just last week, I think, I kept using the word genocide, and someone's like, how do you understand the word genocide? What do you mean by it? And I answered by saying that my definition or my understanding does not matter. Genocide has a definition and criterion. The term was created after the Holocaust and subsequently adopted within the Genocide Convention. Genocide means any of the following acts. If you read the definition, whether killing members of the group, you can read the definition. Causing serious bodily or mental harm to members of the groups, inflicting deliberately conditions of life calculated to bring about the physical destruction, and so on. You can read the definitions. And let me be clear, we did not create the definitions. In fact, the Western world lectured us on human rights and international law. They lectured us for years. So all we did is follow the definition that was given about the genocide. And now that we have mounting evidence and the witness of numerous experts that what Israel has been doing in Gaza fits this definition and meets the criteria and accounts for genocide based on this definition. In fact, and just to name some, this is not everyone. We have the South African case in the ICJ. We have numerous UN experts and repertoires. We have many leading genocide and Holocaust scholars, including Israeli professors like Amos Goldberg, a Holocaust and genocide researcher at the Hebrew University. We have Ras Sigal, associate professor of Holocaust and genocide studies at Stockton University. Omer Bartov, professor of Holocaust and genocide studies at Brown University. We have the report by Francisca Albanese, United Nations Special Rapporteurs on the Occupied Palestinian Territory. We have a report of over 55 scholars of the Holocaust, genocide, and mass violence back in December of last year. We have a joint report by the University Network for Human Rights, International Human Rights Clinic, Boston University School of Law, International Human Rights Clinic, Cornell Law School, Center for Human Rights, University of Pretoria, and the Lowenstein Human Rights Project at Yale Law School. More recently, Human Rights Watch, Amnesty International, and a report commissioned by the UN Human Rights Council. So let's be clear. The real question is not whether there is a genocide or not. The real question is, why are people not calling it a genocide? The real question to me is, why is the church not calling it a genocide? Why are they denying that our people are being massacred? That is the real question we must ask. Why is never again, yet again? And as I said, why isn't the church calling it? How many more need to be killed, by the way? We have at least 50,000, including 17,000 children, and close to 2 million displaced. How many more need to be killed? How much more destruction needs to happen until the world realizes that this is a genocide? Gaza, as we know it, no longer exists. And the silence of those who deny this genocide is so loud. This denial is not short of complicity. And tragically, we are witnessing, and I hope I'm wrong, what some have described as the final stages of this genocide, with an attempt to ethnically cleanse Gaza, leave or die. And that's what we've seen in the first 48 hours when the ceasefire was broken. More than 700 were killed, including 170 children in 48 hours. And part of the reason I wrote the book as a pastor is because I believe that this genocide has taken place in front of the whole world to see, and Christian theology, mainly Western Christian theology, shamefully and tragically played a role in enabling this genocide. The role of theology must be viewed not in isolation, but as a part of a wider matrix. Theology, I believe, and I argued in the book, is part and parcel of a matrix of 3 factors that enabled this genocide: coloniality, racism, and theology. You see, when we try to fathom the amount of hypocrisy and the double standards manifested by the US, the UK, and Europe, and indeed many church leaders, when it comes to the international law and human rights, this can be explained, I would argue, by these 3 intertwining factors. Again, coloniality, racism and supremacy, and empire theology. These 3 elements work hand in hand in the context of Palestine. I defined coloniality based on a document called the Accra Confession, a document by the World Communion of Reformed Churches, and I found that definition very helpful. The coming together of economic, cultural, political, and military power that constitutes a system of domination led by powerful nations to protect and defend their own interests. Again, the coming together of economic, cultural, political, and military power that constitutes a system of domination led by powerful nations to protect and defend their own interests. I don't need to give a lot of proof to show that Israel is part and parcel of this matrix of empire, power, domination, interest. There is a vested interest here why many countries support and protect Israel. It's about more power and more wealth. Israel serves the interest of the superpower. You can look at the many economic ties, the IT, the weapon industry, and so on. I always refer to what President Biden said. If Israel did not exist, we would have to create it in the Middle East to protect our interests. It's very clear. Sure. This domination and exploitation of other nations and their resources, I would argue, is based on racism. The belief that some people groups have less dignity and worth than others, to put it simply. To boast that you will own someone else's land or territory. Own it. We will own Gaza, Trump said. And make it into the Riviera of the Middle East by ethnically cleansing 2 million people. You only declare this when you view yourself as superior and the others are inferior and less human. And the real problem is that this did not go unchallenged. This wasn't really challenged, this concept. The practicality of it was debated. And no one discussed the ethnic cleansing of 2 million people and the audacity to say we will own someone else's land. Now he's talking about other lands. It's not just us in Gaza. And if you need an ideology or religion that turns coloniality and racism into good and righteous acts, then theology and religion come to the service. Empire theology justifies and gives legitimacy to the sins of coloniality and racism, usually by giving it different names: spreading human and democracy, self-defense, fight of good over evil, law and order, and so on. This is how the three work together: coloniality, racism, and theology. It's hard to separate them. To dominate, you must dehumanize. And to dehumanize, you need a discourse that turns the indigenous into terrorists and the acts of colonialism into fighting evil and tyranny and promoting democracy and freedom, law and order, maybe even self-defense. I've never seen the right for self-defense granted to the Palestinians, by the way. I don't know why. You need those who whisper in the ears of Caesar that he is sent from God and what he is doing is not just right, but will actually make us all great again. That's how you dominate. Empires need religion. They need a discourse that declares that you are entitled, chosen, destined, superior. Go and read, by the way, the theology of apartheid, or Christian Zionism, or for that matter, the Israeli nation-state law. And in the case of Palestine, colonialism was described by theology as Jews returning to their land, rendering the indigenous Palestinians, including those Palestinian Christians who lived there for centuries, preserving the heritage and Christian presence, rendering them as aliens and invaders, because someone else is now returning to their land. It's our fault. This is how theology shifts the discourse. This is the power of the theological discourse. And so the ethnic cleansing of 800,000 Palestinians was dismissed as an unfortunate outcome, and those Palestinians are still denied the right to return to their homes, not just land, their homes. They still have the keys, even as visitors. While a Jew born in Brooklyn can settle in Palestine, displace Palestinians, and this will be called Jews returning to their land, or fulfillment of prophecy. Again, this is the power of theology. By the way, when we speak about what's happening in Gaza, have we forgotten that Israel was literally built on the ruins of more than 470,000 villages, and that close to 75% of the people of Gaza are Nakba survivors? Why isn't anybody talking about this? And so let's talk about Western theological and church support to Israel, in particular, as it was evident in this genocide. Support to this genocide manifested itself in several ways. There was full endorsement. There was those who called for the genocide. There was justification. And the unquestioned promotion of the Zionist narrative of the war. And of course, there was also silence, and only some shy, and of course also many peace calls, shy peace calls. And the support was, of course, across different levels. In the book, I have a whole chapter on what Christians said about this war. It was a painful chapter to write as a Palestinian, and particularly as a Palestinian Christians. It was very painful. This support came across different levels: theologians, popular pastors, Christian media, congresspeople, and politicians. In fact, one of the most telling moments to me about theology and the way it supported this genocide was when Congressman Allen, during I think Congress or Senate session about the university encampments, he asked the president of Columbia University if she wants the university to be cursed by God for allowing these demonstrations to happen. Of course, as a Bible exegete, this is butchering the text. But this is even worse. This is what Palestinian theologian Faris Abraham described as theological terrorism, intimidating people using religious text. And mind you, this is not a pastor of a small evangelical church in Arkansas. This is a congressman using the Bible to intimidate and spread a Zionist discourse. And by the way, just to highlight the hypocrisy, I always say, imagine if Muslim Congresswoman Ilham Omar did the same, quoting the Quran to threaten and intimidate that Allah will curse you if you are against Palestinians. Imagine the response. At the beginning of the war, some evangelical pastors celebrated, saying maybe this will usher the second coming of Christ. They see death, they see pain and suffering, and all they think about is their chart of when Jesus will return. One pastor called for Israel to make Gaza a parking lot within a week. This is a pastor. I mean, for us as Palestinians, it's really hard to fathom anybody promoting such violence. I can't understand this obsession with violence that many Christians, particularly evangelicals, have in this country. We were described as Palestinians as the Amalekites. And for those who are not aware of the biblical text, the Amalekites in the Bible were annihilated. And that's what we deserve, it was said. In fact, many Christian Zionists said that Palestinians possess the spirit of Amalek mainly for refusing to accept that God gave the land or accept Israel's sole inheritance of the land today. And so we were told by influential pastors like MacArthur, John MacArthur, if you know the name, and I quote, "But if you are trying to destroy the very people that are the heart and soul of God's plan, then you come under the judgment of God." And that's the spirit of Amalek. We must be annihilated as Palestinians. And of course, there is total disregard to the context, total disregard to why is there violence to begin with. Congressman Tim Waldberg, who was a pastor, by the way, turned into a congressman, said that bombs should be dropped on Gaza like Nagasaki and Hiroshima, so that to get it over with quick. He added, we shouldn't be spending a dime on humanitarian aid. And again, for me, when we hear this from a congressman, then discover that he went to several influential seminaries and was a pastor, it's beyond our comprehension. What Jesus are they following? And the fact that they think of Nagasaki and Hiroshima as good examples is baffling. Oh, we tried this some years ago. We killed 200,000 people. Let's do it again. Really? This war was justified using the just war theory by many Christian ethicists, most notably Russell Moore in Christianity Today. The use of the just war theory, and I wish they apply it, by the way, but they just source it, makes the massacre of 17,000 children the justice of God. You know, more than 17,000 children later, we're still waiting for the same ethicist to actually say something about that article in which he said, this is a just war. At the beginning of the war, a group of Palestinian Christians made a call for repentance. Daniel and myself were among the authors. In it, we said, we are aware of the Western Christian legacy of the just war theory that was used to justify dropping atomic bombs over innocent civilians in Japan during World War II, the destruction of Iraq, and the decimation of its Christian population during the latest American war on Iraq, as well as the unwavering and uncritical support for Israel against the Palestinians in the name of moral supremacy and self-defense. Regrettably, many Western Christians across wide denominational and theological spectra adopt Zionist theologies and interpretations that justify war, making them complicit in Israel's violence and oppression, end quote. Of course, the arguments of anti-Semitism was always thrown at Palestinians. Again, referencing the article of Russell Moore in Christianity Today and many others. In fact, when we created the Christ in the Rubble manger and wrapped Jesus in a kufiya, we were called anti-Semitic because the kufiya represents anti-Semitism. See how it's baffling to me that someone is trying or claims to be trying to defend or to fight anti-Semitism, does so by promoting vile hatred towards Palestinians. Talking about our national identity in words like this. And I must say that, it's really getting on our nerves as Middle Eastern Christians when people mention anti-Semitism. I mean, the audacity to talk about anti-Semitism when the Holocaust happened on your land using your ideology. We didn't butcher 6 million Jews. You did. And then you have the audacity to come and lecture us just because we're trying to resist to stay in our land, the land of our mothers and fathers. They repent on our land over a sin committed on their land. And then they want to come across with higher moral authority. We're not accepting this anymore, believe me. We have the silence of many about what's happening. In fact, one of the most appalling things to me that happened was a statement, a resolution, in fact, by the Southern Baptist Convention, the largest Protestant denomination in the United States. In June 2024, 8 months into the genocide, with thousands of people killed, they made a resolution about October 7th and the war on Gaza. And I kid you not, I had to read the resolution several times to check. They did not mention a single Palestinian who was killed. They mentioned nothing about the Palestinians killed. They could not even make themselves pretend that they care by saying, oh, some Palestinians were killed, but we blame Hamas. They don't see us. Don't tell me it's not racism. That's why we kept arguing. They don't look at us as human, equal humans. Then there was also not just those who called or justified, but there was a lot of what we called, or I called in the book, church diplomacy. Church statements, the art of church statements, as I talk about it in the book. Statements that try to adopt somehow a neutral or middle of the ground approach, only that they always seem to blame the Palestinians, condemn October 7th, and say nothing about Israel. And I analyzed in the book a lot of church statements and a lot of my interaction and stories with many church leaders, especially because many of them for years engaged and met with us, and then we were horrified by their positions. And I summarized this using the example of a statement from the Church of Sweden. And here's the summary of such a statement. Months into the war, the actions of Hamas are condemned. They are described as indiscriminate, brutal, and ruthless. The statement highlights the desecration of bodies and targeting of civilians. The statement also adopts the Zionist narrative that Hamas is using civilians as human shields, which actually dehumanizes Palestinians, It concludes that all these actions are reprehensible and in violation of international law. They must be condemned. Then when they talk about the response of Israel, Israel is never condemned. War crimes are not called out. The actions of Israel are not described as indiscriminate, brutal, and ruthless. There is nothing about the desecration of thousands of children's bodies by bombs. These genocidal acts are, I quote, human tragedy, end quote, that deserve sympathy, but they somehow remain legitimate acts of self-defense by Israel. And by the way, many times in these statements, Palestinians die. Israelis are killed, but Palestinians somehow happen to die. I ask myself, is this a better position than those who called for a genocide or justified it? Many churches called for a ceasefire, and I talk about them in the book. There were genuine talks, genuine calls, yet they came across as toothless because they failed to condemn and call things by name. The language of war crimes, genocide, apartheid, and holding those who commit war crimes accountable is almost missing from these church statements. This is the art of diplomacy. which led me to think a lot and write a lot in the book about the people of faith and our role in peacemaking. And by the way, those who know me and my writings, I seldom like to call other people of faith. I like to focus on my tribe, the Christian community. And for those who accuse me for being too harsh on the church and why aren't you calling out Muslim leaders and Arab leaders and others, I say because I'm a pastor and I am accountable for my people. I don't like to lecture others, and in fact, they know this. But when it comes to peacemaking, can we really be peacemakers if we are not willing to call things by name? Can we really claim to be in solidarity with the oppressed if we're not willing to call things for what they are? I'm in a Catholic university, and I must say this: it should not be controversial if Pope Francis mentions the word genocide. And every time he mentions it, the whole world, it should not be controversial. And in fact, I would argue and talk about it in the book again, this all began, I feel, or this was manifested before the genocide, when there was resentment. In fact, we were fought as activists when we presented many church leaders and many church bodies with the numerous reports mentioned by Daniel that describe Israel's actions using the word apartheid. Of South Africans with us. In fact, our South African friends, when they visit Palestine, they tell us what you have in Palestine is much worse than apartheid. Ours was a walk in the park in comparison. So we presented the proof, we presented the reports by Amnesty International, Human Rights Watch, B'Tselem, Yeshdins, and many others, including the Palestinian report. And we were told this is not helpful. We as churches must be in the middle. We must be neutral. Is this peacemaking? I must ask. Did Jesus avoid controversy? Maybe this has to do with the fact that for years we accepted, and maybe it's our fault, the use of the language of the Palestinian-Israeli conflict. There is no conflict in Palestine. There is a reality of colonialism and apartheid. We are being displaced and replaced every single day as Palestinians. Maybe that's the fault. Purposefully ignoring and even dismissing the reality of settler colonialism and apartheid while claiming to care for the Palestinian plight. God forbid, even talk about weapon embargo. And it's time to really revisit a lot of the terms we've used, whether the Palestinian-Israeli conflict, or how we view Zionism and Christian Zionism for that matter. And it's time we talk about Christian Zionism for what it truly is, based on what Zionism is, and reject it as such. Zionism is an ideology and a movement that engaged in settler colonialism by establishing a state for the Jewish people on someone else's land. Palestine was not empty. Systematically and deliberately committed ethnic cleansing of the Palestinian people. Zionism has established a system of apartheid enforced by an aggressive military occupation. And in Gaza, Zionist Israeli government carried out a genocide. Justifying such acts is at the core of Zionism as a political ideology. And so to my Christian friends, I ask, can we really put the word Christian before all of this? Are colonialism, ethnic cleansing, apartheid, and genocide compatible with Christian ethics and the teachings of Jesus? In fact, many Jewish people protest that these tactics are not compatible with their Jewish ethos and values. And in fact, I wish more Christians would confess this simple yet profound truth. I keep saying that today we're hearing more criticism of Zionism from Jews more than we hear it from Christians. I can't understand this. This is precisely why we need to call out Zionism for what it truly is and make it an interfaith priority to combat any theology of supremacy and exclusion. Let me talk about the concept of Christ in the rubble. Many of you have seen the image, it's on the cover of the book, of Jesus wrapped in a kufiya under the rubble. an image literally seen all over the world. Yet what very few know is that the inception of this concept of Christ in the rubble was actually pastoral in nature. The idea began when the church of St. Porphyrios in Gaza was attacked and 18 people were killed, including 9 precious children. We knew people in the church. And 2 days later, I had to preach. And in fact, before I talk about that, the same day the attack happened on the church, we held an ecumenical service for a ceasefire in the Church of the Nativity in Bethlehem, praying for a ceasefire and for protection. We go home and we hear about the attack. And the first thing I ask myself or ask is, does God actually care? You know, you spend time praying and then this happens. 2 days later, I had to preach, including to someone whose sister was killed in the attack. And you ask yourself, what do you say? People were asking, where was God? Why doesn't God listen? People were afraid. Why does he allow this? Why didn't he listen? And back then I remember saying that I don't have any philosophical or theological answer to that question. Why would God allow suffering? Other than look at the cross and there see Jesus as the victim of the very same violence of the empire. Jesus crying at the cross, my God, why have you forsaken me? To me, that communicates that God actually suffers with us, is the victim of the very same violence. He is in solidarity with us. That's when I said God is under the rubble in Gaza. He's in the hospitals. He's with the bereaved families. God is under the rubble in Gaza. Again, this was a pastoral comment. And then when Christmas came, I shared the idea with my church members, some of them, and I said, let's do something different. Let's portray Jesus as under the rubble in Gaza. And I said after we created that manger next day in church, this is the true meaning of Christmas, the solidarity of God with the marginalized and the oppressed. Jesus was born among the occupied. And if Jesus were born today, he would be born under the rubble in Gaza as a sign of solidarity with the oppressed and the marginalized. I wanted to bring God near to those who experience pain and suffering so that they experience the presence of God. This was the idea of Christ in the rubble, really, the solidarity of God with the marginalized and the oppressed. Maybe it was an attempt to humanize the Palestinians. I remember saying over and over, in a time when we were broken and tired of hearing the world continue to justify and rationalize the killing of our people, we see the image of Jesus in every child pulled from under the rubble. So this was our message. And of course, I shared a message that day. I shared a picture of that image on my social media, and to say it went viral is an understatement. It gave me a platform. And I was really intrigued by this idea that why is the Western media so much interested in the image of Jesus under the rubble, maybe more than they are interested in what's actually happening in Gaza. I remember at the Sunday while preaching with the presence of many media members, and we're not used to this in our small church, asking them, why are you here? This is not the story. The genocide is the story. The platform I received was overwhelming. It was really hard to fathom. But that's when I preached the sermon with defiance and anger, calling out the church, calling out all people of faith, because I believe this is our responsibility. We need to speak with courage. We need to speak our convictions. And again, this was the message, to humanize the Palestinians, precisely that we see the image of Jesus in every child pulled from under the rubble. Christ in the rubble became the message of Palestinian Christians to the world and to the church. Because to me, this has a lot to do with the credibility of our Christian witness. The silence of many was too loud. And I must admit, at the same time, we're very, very grateful for the many voices that spoke out, that responded to our calls, that demonstrated, that acted, with arranged sit-ins, prayer vigils, spoke to their congressmen. Many spoke out. But the silence of others communicated apathy. It did not reflect the heart of God toward the broken and the suffering. Talk about the sin of apathy. Because sadly and tragically, a genocide was normalized today. A genocide that we're watching live on earth. No one can claim they did not know. And this is the tragedy of what happened today. And I also think that there is so much at stake. This is much more than Palestine, especially today, when it seems that everything we have done and worked on as a collective humanity is being trespassed. The idea of human rights, the idea of international law, not that it was perfect, but at least we had something to refer to. And now it's being completely dismissed and ignored. What kind of a world do we want to leave for our children? If it is a world in which people commit war crimes, are not held accountable, in which people claim simply we will own others' land. This is much more about Palestine. Believe me, this is about our collective humanity. Never again must mean never again. Do we really have a credibility as people of faith or as Christians when never again becomes yet again? What did we do so that never again truly becomes never again? This is really partially part of the reason why I wrote this book. I'll conclude by talking about hope. Is hope possible? Can we dare to hope? Should we even preach hope in the midst of a genocide? How can we talk about hope when we have lost more than 17,000 children in Gaza? How can we talk about hope when close to 2 million people have lost their homes? And they're still moving from one place after the other. It's really hard to watch. How can we hope when settler attacks are on the rise and ethnic cleansing is happening in the West Bank? How can we talk about hope when the person who led this Gaza genocide and one of the architects of an apartheid reality is received and welcomed in the Congress as a hero? How can we hope when Arab leaders watch and do nothing to stop this bloodshed? How can we hope when ideologies of supremacy and exclusion dominate our world? How can we hope when the co-director of the documentary No Other Land, a joint Palestinian-Israeli documentary that won the Oscar, was attacked and mobbed by Israeli settlers, then arrested from his ambulance? How can we hope when many churches side with the empire, repeat its rhetoric, and play its tune, all while claiming that they are on the side of peace? How can we hope when the Caesars of today boast about, and I repeat, owning someone else's land, displace millions, turn the tragedy and massacre of millions into an opportunity to grow in wealth and power? Even sharing a video, I'm not sure if you've seen the video, sharing a video of the plan in which she wants to turn Gaza into the Riviera of the Middle East, featuring a Nebuchadnezzar type golden statue of himself. While the church keeps silent, even worse, whisper in his ear, "You are sent by God." How can we hope when the Bible continues to be weaponized against the Palestinian people? Can we stop hoping? The thing is, when we stop hoping, we declare that we give in to tyranny and oppression. When we stop hoping, we allow the oppressors of the empire to shape our reality. When we stop hoping, we accept that injustice is the norm, and I will never accept that. Hope in this sense is a struggle. It is painful, it is illogical. It even feels wrong. But we cannot surrender to the alternative. This is why today as Palestinians we talk a lot about Sumud. For those who don't know, Sumud is the Arabic word for steadfastness, for resilience. It's about refusing to give in. It's about refusing to forget the past. It's about rootedness in the land that yes, this rootedness maybe can be shaken, but can never be uprooted. Yes, the path forward seems to be marked with more suffering, more pain, but until then we will continue to pray, we'll continue to believe, we will continue to fight to keep the faith. One of the things I kept repeating over and over in this war is that they can take everything from us, but they cannot take faith in the justice of God from within us. They cannot take faith from us. This is our sumud. Sumud is our commitment, it's our defiance, it's our resolve. It's our commitment to continue to work for justice, to advocate for life with dignity, and to choose to hope that we will recover from this atrocity. Yes, I look at Gaza and realize the loss is enormous. The destruction is massive. The pain is profound and the wounds are deep. To the extent that recovery seems an illusion, it feels like the bottom of a deep and dark pit. To use a Christian metaphor, it feels like the tomb of Jesus on Saturday. Death, darkness, and silence. But we must choose to hope. And so today we choose to hope. This is sumud. To survive, to exist, to insist that God is good. So we will recover, rooted in resilience, and we will continue to demand justice for our people. We will recover. Thank you.
Okay, yeah, you can. Okay, so you have a code you have to scan in order to submit questions. Those are some of the parameters that we were told to follow for this talk. But we already have some questions, so I will begin since we are also short for time. But I also want to immediately highlight that the book is available to purchase here in the room. So please get your copy and maybe have it signed as well. So the first question is... how can... There are also other ways of scanning. How can Catholic and broader Christian institutions in the West, especially universities, support the Palestinian Christian community in a more meaningful and ethical way beyond prayer and statements? I will also immediately add another question. In your view, what role should Christian theology play in confronting Christian Zionism, particularly in academic or church settings in the West?
So the first question about what Catholic
universities, Catholic and broader Christian institutions in the West.
Is it on? Okay. I'll be very honest and blunt. If you ask this question, you have to be ready for what I'm calling today, or what we call costly solidarity. And solidarity, by the way, by definition, is costly. So if you're genuine about that, I want to ask back, are you willing to pay the price? Especially today. Especially in the culture of fear and intimidation and cancellation that's already exists today. To me, when I talk about, for example, apartheid and genocide, I was recently asked by someone, why do you insist on calling it apartheid? Let's just call it a struggle and discrimination. I said, no. If it's a conflict, we need mediation. If it's apartheid, we need sanctions. We need boycott. That's why I asked back, are you ready? Meaningful acts that will make a difference. And I hope I'm not getting anybody in trouble.
We are already in trouble.
Entail. Acts of what we call creative resistance, acts of solidarity, coming together, especially as people of faith, and saying no. We will not accept to normalize this injustice. So it's not just about prayer and sending thoughts or even charity, and we need lots of support now to rebuild, I know. But how do we ensure that this does not happen again? How do we look inwardly towards the things that enable this ideology? The dehumanization of Palestinians did not happen overnight. That's why I began with the quote, the land without people. There is ongoing hundreds of years of systematic dehumanization of Palestine. We need to look at the theologies of supremacies that still exist within our circles. And finally, I would like to insist something. I don't think there is a Christian solution or a Jewish solution or a Muslim. It's not. It's about coming together as people of faith. More than ever, if you ask me what can we do as Christians, I've been saying this for a while now. Find Jewish and Muslim partners and come together to fight this. This is a critical moment in our history. I'm convinced of that. Because we're heading towards chaos. The rule of might is right. And if we're not able to fight this segregation that exists and separation and extremism and exclusivities, as people of faith, if we're not willing to come together and partner with one another, I don't think we will succeed to face this imminent threat. The second question?
About Christian Zionism, how to argue.
Christian Zionism, I think that, and this is what I tried to say in the book, and if you look at my several works, actually I began, my PhD was in biblical studies, and I spent years debating biblical texts with Christian Zionists and say, let's debate, does the Bible really teach this and that? And there is room for this. In fact, some of my books and some chapters in my books, the older one, talk about this. And there is room and there is need for that. Does the Bible, did it promise the land to? And so on. What does the Bible mean by that? And so on. What does inheritance and land rights mean? But today more than ever, I'm convinced that we need to move beyond this assumption that what's happening in Palestine today can be solved by going back to an ancient religious text and asking, to whom did God give the land? I mean, do we do this in any other context, honestly? Why is it that only in Palestine somehow the Bible says? So when Trump's nominee to become ambassador in the United Nations was asked in the Congress, do you believe Jews have biblical rights to the land? And she says, yes, to the West Bank, actually. I can't, and to me it's unthinkable. Is this how we decide who belongs to whom does the land belong? So we need to challenge this assumption that by going to the biblical text, we decide. We don't do this in any other context. We need a platform that we all agree on. That's why the international law is important. And by the way, I have no problem with affirming Jewish religious, spiritual, and historical connection to our land. Of course, we don't have a problem with that. The problem is when you translate this into, therefore, they can displace Palestinians and establish a homeland on our land, That's where we have the problem. When you turn a religious belief into a political ideology, impose it on others. So we need to challenge all of these assumptions. It's not simply about we have a different understanding of Genesis 12, 1-3, or Romans 9-11, these texts that usually are cited by Christian Zionists. And finally, that's what I tried to argue in the book. We need to judge Zionism and Christian Zionism by its fruits. Its fruits today is the nation-state law. Its fruits today is apartheid. Can we support that? And I'm tired of people trying to portray a different image of Zionism. The only Zionism that exists is the Zionism that we face every day as Palestinians. Let's deal with that Zionism.
Yeah, thank you. I should add that the Jewish nation state law is a law that the Knesset, the Israeli parliament, ratified in 2018, so that was before October 7th. And the document says that the land of Israel, it uses the language of the land, Eretz Israel, not the state of Israel, is fully and entirely for Jews and Jews only. And so it's
And the right for self-determination is exclusive to the Jewish people only. This is constitutional discrimination. This is constitutional Jewish supremacy.
Yeah, and I also want to add, in reference to, you talked about the nomination of Elise Stefanik, where she very explicitly, and now there is, that's kind of like the way in which Congress and the government, the American government, cannot refer to the land where Munther lives as the West Bank, but Judea and Samaria. So this is, this is a very significant development. So you already, actually, in your response, responded to some threads in other questions. So let me go in another direction. One person is asking, can you speak about Hamas? Have some Palestinians put their hope in Hamas, or how is Hamas spoken about or thought about?
Yeah. Hamas is part of the Palestinian people. They don't represent all Palestinians, yet they are Palestinians. They represent a segment of the Palestinian people that first believes in armed resistance. The majority of Palestinians no longer believe in armed resistance. Hamas believes and promotes and acts in armed resistance. And second, Hamas clearly has a religious ideology. And again, not all Palestinians believe in this bringing together of state and religion in the same way Hamas does. And finally, we must look at Hamas as a resistance movement. In other words, when people ask me, how do we get rid of Hamas, and Hamas is the problem, I say, if you get rid of the occupation, we will get rid of Hamas. And usually when people push back, when people ask me about, do you think there is hope as long as Hamas is in power, maybe that was not referenced in that question, but I'll use it to say this because I'm often asked this question. Can there be peace as long as Hamas is in power? I ask, nobody ever asked me, can there be peace as long as Netanyahu is in power? He has committed far more crimes, and he has a far more extreme ideology. So why isn't anybody equating the two extremism if they think of one extreme versus the other? As Palestinian Christians, we've made it very clear. First, we believe and fully endorse nonviolence. And second, we don't believe in any concept of a religious state, be it Christian, Jewish, or Muslim. And so we've made it clear that, yes, Hamas is part of the Palestinian people, but we have foundational disagreements with them, ideological one, practical one, pragmatic one. But at the end of the day, they remain part of the Palestinian people. Do I endorse everything that happened on October 7th? I cannot endorse the killing of children or the kidnapping of children. But again, all we're saying is that I hope you equally refer to the criminal acts of Israel the same way people always push us on what Hamas did on October 7th. I'm always asked, maybe it will come, I don't know, on October 7th and so on. And I ask, you seem to be very concerned about children who were kidnapped. I hope we're all horrified by that. Yesterday, another Palestinian child was killed in detention. More than 63 Palestinians were killed in detention in the last year alone. Why isn't anybody talking about the torture of Palestinians to the extent of killing them in prisons? Yet why isn't there a war to release all the Palestinians, more than 10,000 Palestinians? So you see, our issue here is not about, we support Hamas. It's about why don't you apply the standards equally on all people? Why do you seem to be concerned when certain people are kidnapped, but when Palestinians are literally kidnapped in the middle of the night by soldiers, tortured, held without trial, no one is talking about it? I think today more than 300 Palestinian children are still in detention, and 2 days ago one of them was killed in jail in unknown circumstances. And by the way, the number 63 is only about those that Israel acknowledges that were killed in prison, just in the last year alone.
Yeah, and also it's important with respect to the Hamas question, it's important to note that Hamas came into the foreground as a political force in the 80s, the late 80s. The Nakba happened in 1947 to 1949, and of course the history goes back to, let's say, 1917, when a British Lord Balfour, gave the land to the Jews as someone who was really kind of immersed in Christian Zionist theology, as you write about in the book.
And Palestinian armed resistance did not start with Hamas. The majority of, Palestinian armed resistance in the beginning was from secular left-wing parties, okay? So to think that this is a religious conflict between Jews and Muslims, this is done by design to deflect or shift the discourse from talking about the colonizers versus the colonized into making it a religious discourse. And again, this is something I talk about in the book, the not just the theology of empire, but the control of narrative by the empire. That's why, in most even church circles, when you ask them, when did the conflict begin? Do you know what they answer? You'll be surprised. With the Bible, when Abraham had 2 children, Isaac and Ishmael. Really? So I'm destined to fight with Atalia because of my DNA, or the Bible says that? I mean, I can't understand many times how people, but again, this is done by design. This is done by design. And millions are dehumanized by that, by being described as the forces of evil. Millions are dehumanized. We cannot accept this.
Okay, so we'll turn to the last question, but there are many questions. But I think that in your responses, you touch on many of the threads. But this is a question that really takes us here to Notre Dame, to what we can do. So the question is, in this moment when the movement for Palestinian freedom is facing a peak in repression in the Western imperial core, how can we ensure that we do not retreat into a defensive position and shrink our organizing? I'm thinking, the questioner is saying, particularly about universities, where the encampments offer the only material dent in support fighting against the genocide. Students are being targeted at a large scale. How do we make sure we do not just defensively protect ourselves, but continue to grow the movement? And I should say, to note that 17 of our students were arrested, and they still have, because they protested against the genocide, and they still have legal proceedings against them, and also all kind of assault in terms of doxing, where their information is exposed to the broader world.
Yeah. Honestly, I feel this is more a question for the movement to consider. I'm not American. All I can say is this. Solidarity by definition is costly. That's number one. Second, this is more than Palestine. Believe me, this is much more than Palestine. I hope you see it. I hope you recognize that this is not just about Palestine anymore. The consequences of this moment in history will be looked at many, many years from now. I can't remember the whole quote, but it's something like, first they came for the communists, then they came for the... I hope we realize that this is what's happening now. And if we are silent and cave in, and I think the caving in is already happening, the way to respond is by coming together. That's why I insisted. It's not, no one should be left isolated in this field. The way to respond is by making sure this is not viewed as simply a Muslim cause or a Palestinian cause, as if, Palestinians are fighting. And look at the names they target, the people they target. Clearly there is an agenda behind it, and how in the media they are called Hamas supporters. So this is all intentional. And the only way to do it, and that's why I call my Christian friends, where are you? Why aren't you speaking out? The Palestinians who's now, what's his name, who's Mahmoud Khalil. I'm really ashamed of the response of the church. It's just fear. You need to defend the vulnerable. And clearly he's being singled out. And will he be left alone in the field? So they're making a scapegoat or even an example. Yeah. So the way to fight this is by emphasizing this is not about a certain people group, this is about all of us together, and not leaving people alone. This is done collectively, coming together, especially now, as I said, it's Mahmoud Khalil first. Who's next? Which struggle will be targeted next? It's the Palestinians now. And interestingly, the Palestinians were now singled out as the target in these battles.
Thank you. Since as part of the parameters for this conversation, and I'm so grateful that we managed to create this space, and for you, Reverend Munther, for being here and coming here to share with us your words of truth. We'll have to conclude, but I want to say a few concluding words from my perspective a little bit, even though I may be reaching beyond the time limit that we were given. So I just want to say that I really appreciated, Father Khaled, your kind of framing of the conversation or the space that we created here together. I just want to say that I appreciate so much what you said, but I'm not here personally because of compassion. I'm here, which is the word that you used. I'm here because of my, ethical outrage and ethical responsibility. As that really propels me. I have no choice but to show up for the struggle, to show up. I show up from my own situatedness with the responsibility of being Jewish, and my research and my activism has been all about interrogating Zionism specifically from a Jewish perspective. But I really want to heed your call at the end of your talk to say where you underscore the need for an interfaith interrogation of the theology of empire, of power and religion and violence. So with that, thank you all for being here, for showing up. And thank you, Father Khaled, and of most thanks and most gratitude and costly solidarity is a concept that I think we all should emerge with to Munther Isaac with me.